Hey guys, welcome to another review for Test 1. This is Units 1 and 2, Test 1, readings 1 through 4. And on this video, we are going to review the bell work because it is supposed to create a nice study guide for you. You should also have the review topics. That is really important. That's on Schoology. Your IDs lists are extremely important. That's the most important stuff. And you can, of course, watch the videos that we've already posted. All right. So the very first bell work that we did went back to Unit 0. There may be a few questions on Unit 0, but everything on the test pretty much is going to come from readings 1 through 4. All right, what were the ways early humans used fire, heat, light, and protection? Hunting, like literally running animals off a cliff by catching the stuff behind them on fire and scaring them. Smoke to pacify bees for honey collection, which I always am very surprised that they figured that out. And then it takes us about 1,000,000 years, but we do eventually figure out cooking. Number 2, what were some results of the invention of agriculture or farming? A stable food supply, but less variety in our diet. Settled life became possible. Specialization of labor. If you don't know what specialization of labor is, it is the idea that people can do something other than create or tend to food crops. It is any job that is not creating food. So my job is created by specialization of labor, and pretty much everyone I know, since I know very few farmers. All right, inequalities, social inequalities, the rich versus the poor, gender inequalities, women not being able to have the same rights. Those are the inequalities. And then more disease because we live closer to each other and closer to animals. All right, number 3, name the 4 river valley civilizations. I think this one was pretty easy. Mesopotamia, Egypt, Indus Valley, and then China, which you might hear Shang China, or the Yellow and Yangtze River civilization. Number 4, what is the belief in the existence of a single divine entity? That is monotheism. And then number 5, which major religions share this belief? If we're just looking at major religions, that's going to be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in that order chronologically. And then the other two, Manichaeism and Zoroastrianism, are kind of little known but still meaningful religions. And Zoroastrianism was mentioned more in your book than Manichaeism. It comes from Persia, ancient Persia. All right, number 6, what is the diaspora? That is the forced removal of the Jews from their homeland after the takeover of the original Israelite kingdoms. The results of that is that the Jews spread throughout the Middle East and eventually throughout the world and create communities for themselves, community pockets all throughout the world. Number 7, what monetary concept did the Greeks invent? That is coins. Number 8, what were some things invented in ancient Rome? Concrete, arches, the use of arches in buildings and in aqueducts and things. The government system, a republic, which we borrowed, representative government. Number 9, why did these years matter? And you had 476 and 622. So 476 is often given as the fall of Rome. A little earlier in their history, Rome had broken into 2 parts, the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire. And in 476, the Western Empire collapses completely, and Western Europe is going to fall into feudalism. And we'll talk about feudalism, but it's a very localized governments. The central governments have very little power. The kings have to share their power, and so that makes them weaker. So we'll see what that looks like coming up in the reading on Europe. The eastern half of that empire will continue on calling itself Rome as half of Rome, but we call it the Byzantine Empire. So we'll talk about that as well. So that's 476. 622 is the year that Muhammad was pushed out of Mecca by the governing tribe there, the governing clan. And he runs to Medina. In Medina, he gains followers, and then he protects himself from several attacks by that clan, and then he comes back and destroys the idols of the Kaaba, creating the center of Islam. So in the Muslim calendar, that marks year 1. This is the beginning of the Muslim calendar, so that's why 622 is important. Number 10, what is the Byzantine Empire a continuation of? I mentioned that back in number 8. It is the continuation of the Eastern Roman Empire. All right, now we're moving into the bell works that actually cover units 1 and 2. Number 1, what regions did the Silk Road connect? China or East Asia and Persia or the Middle East. It goes through Central Asia. It does not go as far south as India, so it's just right across that central zone. Number 2, what new technologies helped the Silk Roads? Saddles and the stirrup on the saddles. They also brought some camels into the system eventually. Those are going to be the technologies most important for the Silk Roads. Indian Ocean trade will be the lateen sail, that triangular sail that's better for the monsoon winds and the magnetic compass. And then the trans-Saharan trade, it's going to be the domestication of camels and then the creation of camel saddles. Number 3, what constitutes a great tradition? This is in comparison to a small tradition. Some people had some issues with this one. A great tradition is something that unifies many places or many people under one culture. So the example for that that I give usually is the Roman Empire, because so many places in Europe that don't necessarily like each other and consider themselves to be very different, they have common characteristics because the Roman Empire wants to own them. Like many European languages are Latin-based because the Roman Empire spoke Latin. But it's going to be unifying characteristics like language, religion, culture, food, etc. And the reason this was mentioned was it was in the reading about Africa, because the southern, like sub-Saharan Africa, did not have a great tradition to unify them. They have many, many small traditions. They do have common, sometimes they will have a few things in common, but they don't have enough in common to be considered one culture. All right, the next question was, what was spread by the Bantu? This is going to be the closest thing to a great tradition that sub-Saharan Africa had, because they do spread some cultural characteristics. So the first one is language. That's the most important. The Bantu language is going to blend in with local languages, with Arabic, and create new languages throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Iron technology for tools and farming, and then agricultural techniques, which is going to increase food supply. And especially my in-class students will know that I've said this several times, it's a historical truth. More food will always equal more people. The next one, how do nomads affect trade? They helped move goods, ideas, and people across the Silk Roads. They provided animals to the system, trained animals, horses or donkeys or camels or anything else that they might need. Animal handlers like traders or trainers, or people who can help leading the animals, things like that. And they could protect or attack caravans. Nomads are often attributed with being the barbarians, being the bandits, but you could also hire nomads to protect you on your way across. Number 3, where were the Polynesians traveling? They were traveling through the Pacific Oceans and the islands. Think Moana, the movie Moana, the Disney movie Moana. And where were the Vikings traveling? The Atlantic Ocean. They actually made it to the Americas. But they often don't get credit because they did not leave a lasting impact on the Americas. All right, next, what was built to connect the Yellow and Yangtze rivers? That is the Grand Canal. And why was that done? Well, if you look at a map, China has lots of rivers that run east to west, or vice versa, but they have very few that go north to south, and they needed a way to travel quickly north to south. So they basically built themselves a man-made river. and the Grand Canal is huge. And so they're able to bring, obviously mostly trade items and stuff. Another kind of historical truth is that boats can carry more than pretty much anything else. Boats can carry very heavy loads along long distances, and it makes trade a lot easier. All right, number 2, what is the tributary system? The tributary system is a system in China in which, in order to trade with China or to have good relations with China, other nations were forced to admit their China's superiority. And so, in order to do that, they would have to go meet the emperor, bring gifts, and do this ritual bowing called kowtow. Where they would have to just literally bow down to the emperor. And you had to send somebody important, a prince or an ambassador. It couldn't just be a peasant or something. To bow down and admit that you needed China more than China needed you. It's very kind of extra, I guess, but it went on for a very long time. And people were willing to do it because the benefit of that is less war, more trade, more knowledge flowing into your nation, technology, religion, all kinds of things that you might need that would come out of China. All right, number 3, what new form of female subjugation was seen in Song, China? That would be the lovely foot binding ritual. So if I hope that you read about this, you looked at the PowerPoint and saw the pictures. It's extremely uncomfortable. It is also, it's not just about aesthetics, although the story behind this, the in-person students will have heard this already, my virtual students, the story behind foot binding, or the kind of legend, I guess, behind how foot binding was created, that an emperor fell in love with a dancing girl, and he talked about how much he loved her little tiny feet that looked like lotus flowers. And so then it became like a fashion to like what the emperor liked. If he liked little tiny feet, so should everyone else. And so it kind of bloomed from there, that everyone wanted women with little tiny feet. And so since we can't control that, we tried. The Chinese tried. And so what they would do is when a girl was about 5 or 6 years old and her feet had reached the kind of maximum size that they wanted, they would begin wrapping it really tightly with silk, and it would kind of push the toes under. And so since we can't actually stop our feet from growing, it just made them grow really deformed. And so there are pictures of that on the PowerPoint. Or you can Google it, but it's bad either way. It's excruciatingly painful as you grow up and your bones are deformed, and you're putting weight on basically broken bones. So this becomes really important in the control of women. And it also becomes a social status, because if you were a lowly farmer, you couldn't afford to have one of your family, your wife or your daughters, out of working conditions. So they could not bind their feet. So that was really important. So for social status, you would want to do that if you could, to get your daughter a higher marriage. And then, of course, since your wife can't go anywhere without your permission, since she's going to need help getting anywhere. So they didn't bring their wives very often. They left them secluded at home. So it's a control thing, it's a status thing, and it's a miserable thing. All right, what plant did Champa send to China that made a huge impact? Champa is part of what is now Vietnam, and they sent fast maturing rice, or fast ripening rice, that increased the food supply. And again, as I mentioned earlier, more food equals more people. Okay, there's a reason that China has always had a really high population, and one of them is their great food supply. All right, the next one, who are the Trung sisters? They are Vietnamese women, sisters obviously, that led a resistance movement against Chinese forces. They're used as an example of the Vietnamese resistance because they proved how much the Vietnamese had to lose, and especially women, if China was to take over. They don't want their feet bound. They don't want to be, bottom of the social order, etc. All right, next, what is flying money? It was basically a credit system invented in China where you would put your money into basically like a bank account type situation, and then you would get a um, representation of that money on paper, and then you could take it somewhere else and pick it up. All right, gunpowder is a weapon. Obviously, it's sulfur-based. There's other ingredients, and it's invented in China. It's used to blow things up, right? They used it for kind of small cannons. Think about Mulan, and fireworks and things like that. Eventually, we have the cannon, the more traditional cannon with the cannonball, and then we have the handheld weapons, guns, etc. coming out of that. All right, and the movable type is a type of printing, and it was invented in Korea but used and improved in China, and then of course Europe is going to catch up a little bit later, but it makes printing much faster, and we'll talk about the idea of making reading materials more affordable and faster is important for everyone, even if you're illiterate. If only one person in your town can read, they can read it to you. And if you're a farmer and there's a new pamphlet on fertilizer and he reads it to you and you change your farming technique and then you produce more food, you get more money, your area is more healthy, more food equals more people. You see where I'm going. This is really going to affect history. More people being able to read, having access to knowledge. We're going to see a much faster, like invention rates and survival rates and things as we kind of just become smarter as a human race. All right, next. What cultures were listed as influenced by China? Influenced by China is sinification, the word for that. The most important examples for us are Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. They're also in that order. Korea is most influenced and Vietnam is least influenced, but they are all influenced by China. All right, so then the next one is define sinification, which is a non-Chinese nation being influenced by China. And then give examples of sinification from East. Korea is going to heavily use the examination system. Vietnam used lots of the farming techniques. And Japan, and actually the others as well, are going to use Chinese versions of Buddhism. And then one common example across all of them, of course, that I already gave you was languages are influenced by Chinese cultures. Chinese characters. Some of their food is similar. Some of their clothing is similar. There's just Korea starts making porcelain. They actually improve it. They all use paper. There's just an abundant amount of examples of sinification on those areas. All right, on to reading 2. We already talked about the Chinese tribute system, so we're going to skip that one. Give examples of subjugation of women in Asia. Sati, which is widow burning in India, where if a woman's husband passed away, she was pressured into throwing herself onto the funeral pyre. And yes, that was forced, and for my virtual students, that is required, and if you did not do it, you would be cut off from your family completely, your parents, your children, everything, so you'd be out on your own. And in the caste system, that meant that there was very few options for you for working. All right, and then foot binding in China, of course. All right, number 3, what is shamanism? It's the belief in nature spirits and the ability of some to communicate with non-human forces. Lots of religions were shamanistic before we see the kind of more organized religions. All right, number 4, what are Mamluks? They're Turkish slave troops in the Abbasid Empire, the Muslim empires. This is not the last time that the Muslims are going to try to use slave troops. They are going to turn on them eventually. The Mamluks are going to overthrow the caliphate in Egypt and create their own. They do become very powerful. They're trained to fight. They are paid, which I know does not equate to the word slave to you, but they are. And they're highly educated. And so this is kind of not anything like any kind of slavery you've ever heard of, but it is not optional. You can't leave. So that's the slave part. All right, number 5 here. When the Umayyad were overthrown by the Abbasid, what territory was left in Umayyad hands? That is the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, but Portugal hadn't existed yet. So Spain. So I showed you a video, or I gave you a video link to a video of the Spanish and Arabic languages being spoken at the same time to show you the kind of similarities there. And that, of course, comes from this, 700-year reign of Muslim dynasties over Spain. All right, what happened in between Europeans and Muslims in 732? That would be the Battle of Tours, where the Muslims were invading Europe. They came across northern Africa up through Spain. They did take Spain, but on their way into France, they were stopped at Poitiers by Charles the Hammer Martel. And so they stopped him. They stopped the Muslim advance into Europe, which would, of course, change history if they would have been able to storm through France. But they did not. So that drew the line for where the Muslims were going to be active in Europe. All right, the next one, how did Mansa Musa's travels affect Mali? Now, they affected all of North Africa and even the Middle East by bringing in too much gold and causing inflation and things like that. But how did it affect Mali back home? He brought knowledge of Islam and built mosques and universities when he came home. He gave a lot of money away and hurt their economy. It hurt other people's economy. It was a very generous thing to do, but it just made the flow of gold all unpredictable. He brought scholars back from the Middle East and other things, and he really also brought a lot of attention to Western Africa and Mali from the rest of the world. All right, number 3, what group rules the Delhi Sultanate and where is it located? Muslims rule the Delhi Sultanate and is located in northern India and then eventually most of India. And this is going to be crucial because it's going to bring the Islam-Hindu conflict that is going to kind of characterize this region for the rest of the time period we're going to study up until World War II. All right, the next one, what is a hadith and why is it important to Islam? It's said to be the words or deeds of the Prophet. So I always say, like, what would Muhammad do? And it helps shape Sharia law, which affects everything. John Green kind of makes a joke about hadiths because some of them are literally from friends or family members that actually knew Muhammad and talked about how he behaved. Others are from people, who may or may not have had a whole lot of contact with him. And so some of them are more serious than others, but hadith do help shape Sharia law. All right, the next one is who is Ibn Battuta. He's a Moroccan traveler. He's a Muslim traveler. He left when he was 20 to go on his Hajj to visit Mecca. And then after he did that, he traveled throughout the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, and wrote about his experiences and kind of shaped the opinion of all of those areas and interest in all of those areas by doing so. So he's often compared to Marco Polo because they both did this, but he actually traveled much further. Marco Polo never went into Africa. Ibn Battuta traveled in several places in Africa, not just Morocco. But both of them have a similar effect on their cultures. All right, next, describe the Mongol government before Genghis Khan. It was clan-based. Khans were the leaders, but their decisions had to be ratified by a council. So they were not, like dictatorships. They could not just do whatever they wanted. They were relatively egalitarian. Women had some rights. It even talked about how women could rule between Khans. If her husband died, she could rule until the next one was chosen because it is not necessarily directly hereditary. Usually sons did get the job, but they didn't necessarily have to. All right, and then it was all separate clans. There was no large government. Genghis Khan is the one who's going to unify them. All right, next one, describe Mongol lifestyle. This is pretty simplistic, but they have a very heavy horse culture. They learn to ride very young. They fight from horses. They, travel by horse. They use horses a lot. It's very tribal, nomadic. They do move around, usually seasonally, but egalitarian, as I mentioned before, and shamanistic. Their beliefs were tied to the land and, trees and nature spirits and sky gods and all of that kind of blended together. All right, what happened to the Mongols after Genghis Khan's death? His empire split into 4 khanates, very similar to what happened to Alexander the Great's empire. After the charismatic leader that brought everyone together dies, it's hard to hold together. And those khanates were linked together but not ruling together. They were ruling separately. They have different styles of ruling, and you had some reading on that. All right, and then number 4, the spread of what famous disease is attributed to the Mongols? The bubonic plague. So some scientists and some historians say that they definitely did. Others say it's not necessarily just their fault, but it does come across from China during the Mongols' reign to basically the Middle East, and then it kind of bounces over into Europe due to both trade and warfare. All right, next, what was unique about the Yuan dynasty of China? That is because the Yuan dynasty is actually Mongols. That's when Kublai Khan leaves and goes down to China and rules China kind of separately. He creates a Chinese style capital, moves into a palace, doesn't live in his yurt anymore, and all of that. So, how did the Mongols rule Russia versus China? They ruled Russia very indirectly. They stayed on the outskirts and they just kind of collected their taxes. It was very disconnected. They were not involved in the politics and stuff there. They did kind of choose some princes over the other, which does change the dynamic of Russia, but they did not spend a lot of time in Russia. China, on the other hand, very direct. Kublai Khan was in everything. He brought administrators. He oversaw day-to-day operations, etc. He was very directly involved. They also, the AP test loves to compare these Khanates. They'll also sometimes throw in the Ilkhan. Over in Persia, they're going to keep the Persian style administration. They are going to, many are going to convert to Islam, which means that they're going to affect the Mongols greatly with that. So if you want to check that out, remember there's an extra reading on that. You want to make sure you can compare these guys because the AP test loves to do that. Next one, what dynasty overthrew the Mongols in China? That is the Ming with Hong Wu, the rebel and bandit and monk that eventually became emperor. All right, next, who was the first Tsar of Russia? That would be Ivan III or Ivan the Great. He overthrew the Mongols and created what we call Imperial Russia. Next, what is nomadism? It is a way of life forced by scarcity where there are no permanent homes. You travel usually seasonally. Sometimes we also add in the idea of pastoralism, which is where they keep their own herds and they move them around instead of chasing herds. So those things are linked, but not exactly the same. Number 6, what is the Lama with one L? It is a Buddhist teacher, okay, a teacher of Buddhism. Number 7, what does the term kamikaze refer to? Many people jumped straight to World War II and talked about the suicide soldiers, but this is actually, the definition or the translation is divine wind, and it was used to describe the storms that saved them from the Mongols. When the Mongols tried to invade Japan, they were kind of blown away by these typhoons, and so they called it divine wind. Later, that's used to describe the pilots from World War II because they were seen as like saving Japan and coming in on the winds, right? So that's where that comes from. But the original term kamikaze was talking about these storms or, basically a divine wind that saves Japan. So I guess both, it works for both. All right, so I hope that helped. Just make sure you have the right stuff to study. Remember that this isn't everything, that your IDs isn't everything, that you're going to have to just study. You're going to have to read, you're going to have to review, you're going to have to watch videos, and you're going to, on the test, the most important thing is you're going to have to actually apply this information. Compare to societies, not just name things. It's not about necessarily memorization, it's about understanding. Okay, so go study, and, I hope this helped. Bye.